Hello biologists, I'm Dr. Kimo Morris at Santa Ana College, and today I will be walking you through the external and internal anatomy of the spiny dogfish. We're going to start with the external anatomy of the spiny dogfish shark. These animals are cartilaginous fishes. They belong to the class Chondrichthyes, which means that their endoskeleton is made up entirely of cartilage. Before I begin though, I do want to have a quick disclaimer. This video is intended for college students in biology or marine biology. Please note, we do not condone the wholesale take of sharks from nature. Please consult your state fishing regulations and respect all marine life. These sharks were provided by a biological supply house for educational purposes only. Okay, now that I have that out of the way, this dogfish shark is a model specimen. It has features in common with most other sharks, but it also has a few that are not found in some. So please keep that in mind if you're in a comparative anatomy class. So this animal has a fusiform body form, which means that it's very torpedo-like or like a submarine. It's tapered at one end, at the anterior end, but it's also tapered at the tail end as well. And this animal has a heterocircle tail. I'm going to bend that around here like this so you can see that. This is a heterocircle tail. The etymology of that word means that it's a different curvature. That means that this caudal fin has a larger lobe on the dorsal side than it does on the ventral side. So this would be the dorsal lobe. This is the ventral lobe. This animal has paired fleshy pectoral fins. Here is one side and here's the other. And they also have paired pelvic fins. I'm going to turn them over real quick. Here are the paired pelvic fins right here. Right there. Now, if this were a male shark associated with those pelvic fins, you would also have two structures hanging off, one off of each, that are referred to as the claspers. And that is the male reproductive organ. These animals reproduce with internal fertilization. And let me flip them back over. This particular species is a female. And there are two dorsal fins. This here, the larger dorsal fin, is the anterior dorsal. This fin back here is the posterior dorsal fin. While an anal fin is present in other sharks, this particular species does not have an anal fin. Okay, now let's focus on closer features. Here's the snout of the organism right here, and the eye is located right on the side where you would expect it. These animals do have good vision, but they mostly rely on olfaction or smelling and other senses to detect the world around them. They have nares, external nares, which are essentially the nostrils. And I'm going to zoom in on that real quick. There you go. So there's the nares right there. And these are blind pits that essentially detect chemical signals in the environment, so they can swim either towards or away from a chemical gradient. And their mouth is oriented on the ventral surface right here. So there's their mouth with the prominent teeth inside. And these teeth are modified placoid scales. I'm going to explain that in just a second. In fact, the surface of this organism is covered with scales that are called placoid scales. And they're microscopic, so you can't really see them in this video here. These placoid scales are actually referred to as dermal denticles. Dermal referring to the skin, and denticles implying that they are very teeth-like. Under high magnification, you would actually notice them looking very tooth-like. They actually look like trident teeth. There are elements of enamel and dentine in these dermal denticles, so they are essentially similar to teeth on the skin. These animals are very streamlined, and when you rub your finger from the anterior to the posterior direction, it feels very smooth. However, when you rub in the opposite direction, it feels rough. And that's because the dermal denticles, even though they're arranged tightly, kind of stick up on the posterior end of the scale. So you can actually hear my thumb rubbing against it in the video, but not in the other direction. Okay, as I mentioned before, those teeth are actually modified dermal denticles, and they are derived in a similar way to the dermal denticles on the skin through embryogenesis. So here are the external gill slits. This animal has 5 gill slits on the side here that are easy to see, but I also want to draw your attention to this port right here behind the eye. They're paired, there's one on either side. This is the spiracle, and the spiracle is actually the remnant of an ancestral first gill slit. And in these organisms, they actually serve in respiration. So this animal is a benthic shark, and like many sharks that rest on the bottom, they have to ventilate by forcibly having water go across their gills. In other sharks, like requiem sharks, for example, they achieve this by continuous swimming. But if you're a benthic shark, you can't necessarily do that. So this spiracle up at the top offers an area for water to enter into the gill chamber instead of having it come in through the mouth. Since this animal is resting on the bottom and maybe on sand or mud, if it were to ventilate only through its mouth, well, then it could risk getting its gills all fouled up with sand and mud. So if it's resting on the bottom, and in fact, some sharks, skates and rays, are able to rest in the mud itself. They hunker down in it and cover themselves with mud or sand. The spiracles sticking up allow for clean water to essentially come into their gill chamber and then flush outwards. So that's common in benthic sharks. Now, like other fishes, this animal has a lateral line canal, and the lateral line canal is essentially running right down the length of the body here. And there are pits all along this canal for detecting vibrations in the water column. And also, really interesting feature about these sharks is the ampullae of Lorenzini, and I'm going to have this video zoom in here. What look like blackheads all along the underside of the head of this organism, both in front of the mouth and to some degree behind the mouth, and also on the side of the face of this organism, behind the eye and in front of the eye, and even on top, are these small pits that are filled with a gelatinous substance, and this allows these sharks to detect electrical signals in the water column down to 1/10 of a millivolt. So that's incredible. That's a sense that you and I don't have, but these structures, known as ampullae of Lorenzini, allow this animal to detect electrical currents in the water column. Pretty amazing. Okay, so this ends the external anatomy of the dogfish shark.